The office lobby was modern, sleek, and intentionally intimidating. Glass walls, sharp edges, and the faint scent of expensive furniture polish filled the air. Every piece of decor seemed designed to remind visitors they were somewhere important. He sat quietly on the edge of a long leather bench, a printed resume in a slim folder resting on his lap, hands folded over it with the stillness of someone who knew not to fidget. He had arrived 10 minutes early, dressed neatly in a pressed navy shirt, slacks, and clean shoes. No designer logos, no expensive watch, just effort and readiness. A receptionist had greeted him briefly and told him someone would be out shortly. He had waited patiently, watching other employees walk past, some offering him curious glances, others not looking at him at all. When the woman finally emerged from behind the frosted glass doors, she walked quickly, heels tapping with purpose. She looked to be in her early 40s, tailored blazer, icy smile, eyes that moved like scanners. She didn't offer a handshake when she approached. "Marcus?" she asked, though it sounded more like confirmation than greeting. He stood. "Yes. Nice to meet you." She turned without replying and motioned for him to follow. "Right this way." The conference room they entered was bright, overly lit with harsh white fluorescence and walls covered in framed photos of team outings and award nights. It had the corporate charm of a space that tried too hard. She sat at the head of the table, opened a folder, and glanced at his resume for a total of 5 seconds before looking back at him. "So," she said, "you're applying for the junior strategist position?" "Yes," he replied evenly. "I've done independent consulting for smaller brands and helped lead a few campaigns during an internship. I'm really excited about the direction your firm is going, especially after the campaign you ran for Carlton and Pine." Her lips curved upwards slightly, but it wasn't a smile. "Right. And where did you study again?" He named his university, a well-respected state school, not Ivy League, but known for producing sharp graduates. She nodded once, closed the folder, and leaned back in her chair. "Well," she said, dragging the word like a curtain being pulled open just slowly enough to make someone uncomfortable. "We're a very fast-paced environment here. Not everyone fits. The clients we work with expect a certain polish." He didn't react, but the air between them shifted. "I'm going to be honest with you, Marcus," she continued, her voice now taking on the tone of someone explaining something to a child. "This job's not really for people like you. It's competitive, demanding. Not everyone clicks with our culture." There was no misunderstanding the phrasing. It wasn't about qualifications. It wasn't about experience. It was about perception. It was about who she expected to see in a seat across from her, and who she didn't. He took a slow breath, not because he was shocked, he wasn't, but because he was making the conscious decision not to respond the way she likely expected. He didn't challenge her. He didn't ask what she meant. He simply nodded once, stood up, and extended his hand. "Thank you for your time," he said quietly. She hesitated, then shook it, already reaching for the next folder. He walked out of the office with the same calm he'd walked in with, but this time something had shifted. Not in his posture, not in his tone, but in the way the silence settled behind him. She hadn't seen him, not really, but someday she would. The rejection never arrived in an email, but Marcus didn't need one. The moment he left the interview, he already knew the answer. There was a specific kind of silence that followed conversations like that, the kind where a polite response would never come because no one thought he deserved even the appearance of fairness. But he didn't let the weight of it settle. Instead, he walked out of the building with the same calm expression he had worn walking in, holding onto the same folder that had gone untouched on the table in front of her. He didn't throw it away. He didn't tear it up. He took it home, placed it on his desk, and opened a blank document. He started that night. He didn't know yet what the end goal would be, but he knew the rejection had confirmed something he'd already suspected, that the traditional path wasn't built for someone like him. And so, if no one was going to open a door, he would stop asking. He began freelancing online, building strategy decks, offering to audit small business websites, pitching campaign plans to companies barely surviving on social media. He undercharged at first, not because he didn't know his worth, but because he understood trust took time. What he lacked in industry connections, he made up for in outcomes. Clients didn't care where he studied once their numbers climbed. Results didn't need a pedigree. He worked late, sometimes until the sky began to shift colors. He read every case study he could find, studied ad campaigns from agencies that would never interview him, and reverse-engineered the logic behind every post, click, and conversion. When he wasn't working, he was teaching himself analytics tools, design programs, marketing psychology. He didn't have an office, only a borrowed laptop, a cheap second monitor, and a wall he covered in handwritten notes and printouts. Months passed. Then a year, then 2. By then, he had clients in 3 cities, then 5. Word spread fast, not through LinkedIn posts or flashy videos, but through referrals. People told each other about the guy who actually listened to their goals, who didn't just recycle agency buzzwords, who knew how to scale with what little they had. He built a small team, 2 freelancers at first, then 4, each one someone like him, overlooked, self-taught, hungry. They worked from coffee shops, libraries, basements. Their branding was minimal, their name unknown, but their campaigns worked. They didn't chase awards, they chased outcomes. Some of the clients they landed came from companies with in-house teams that were too slow, too bloated, too arrogant. One of them had just left the agency that turned Marcus down. He recognized the name on the invoice before he sent it. He didn't gloat. He just hit send and moved to the next one. And when the emails started to come, inquiries from larger firms, invitations to collaborate, early-stage investors reaching out, he responded with professionalism, never excitement. He had already learned that recognition came late, often only after proof had done all the heavy lifting, so he stayed focused, built systems, scaled. By the time his company was being profiled in a national newsletter, the agency that rejected him was quietly losing clients, struggling to adapt. The same polished building, the same culture of exclusion, but a dwindling influence behind the glass. He read the news, noted it, and returned to work, because the goal had never been to impress them. It had always been to outgrow them. The conversation began with a simple call from his CFO, who had been monitoring the acquisition market for months. There was an agency on the table, one that was struggling financially despite its long-standing reputation, and their portfolio included several regional accounts Marcus's firm had already been targeting. On paper, it looked like a smart move: expand their reach, absorb their clients, restructure the leadership, and fold the name under their growing creative network. But it wasn't until the company name was spoken aloud that Marcus leaned back in his chair and let a quiet, reflective smile creep into his expression. It was the same agency, the one that didn't see him. The one that had reduced him to a stereotype in a 5-minute conversation and a forced smile behind a polished desk. He didn't speak right away. He simply let the thought sink in, not with bitterness, but with clarity. He asked for the numbers. They were worse than expected. Client churn had accelerated, morale was low, and their senior creative team had been gutted after 2 major contract losses. But the brand still had recognition in the region, and their remaining client list included a few long-standing accounts worth keeping. More importantly, their assets were undervalued. His team had already outpaced them in strategy, agility, and digital reach. What they lacked in legacy, they now made up for in leverage. He didn't need to buy them. He could outcompete them entirely within a year. But this wasn't about revenge. It was about vision. He saw what that brand could be with the right leadership and the right culture, what it could become without the invisible ceilings and the quiet exclusion it had fostered for so long. He told his team to move forward. Negotiations took a few weeks, but there was little resistance. Their leadership was desperate for a way out, and his acquisition offer was fair, clean, and came with the promise of retaining a portion of the staff. The deal closed quietly, without headlines. There was no dramatic press release, no boastful announcement. That wasn't Marcus's style. Instead, his legal team finalized the documents, and his HR lead began scheduling internal meetings with department heads. On the Monday morning following the acquisition, Marcus walked into the agency's downtown office building not as a hopeful candidate, but as its new owner. The interior hadn't changed much. The same white walls, the same glass partitions, the same desk where he had once sat with his resume in hand while being told in polished terms that he didn't belong. He was early. Staff hadn't arrived yet. He walked the halls slowly, absorbing the silence. It wasn't pride, he felt. It was a sense of symmetry. The place that once filtered people like him at the front door was now part of something he'd built, and that meant it could finally be reshaped from the inside out. By the time the employees started arriving, the mood in the building had shifted from routine to uneasy curiosity. Word had spread over the weekend. Rumors of the acquisition had trickled down, but no one knew yet who the new leadership would be. Marcus waited in the main conference room, standing at the head of the table instead of sitting. He didn't wear a suit, just a dark sweater, slacks, and the quiet assurance of someone who had nothing to prove anymore. When the managers walked in, they smiled politely, scanning the room for someone else, until they realized he was the one. She walked in last, the same hiring manager from that first interview. Her face registered recognition almost instantly, but it took a beat longer for understanding to land. Her steps faltered, but she recovered quickly, offering the same polite professionalism she had once weaponized as dismissal. "Good morning," she said, voice smooth but thinner now. "Are you with the parent company?" Marcus smiled gently, not unkindly. "No," he said. "I own it." She blinked. He let the words land with all the weight they carried, and then without another beat, he began the meeting. No smugness, no gloating, just vision. Plans for restructuring, investment into new platforms, and an open-door policy for any team member willing to bring ideas and leave old hierarchies behind. He didn't mention the past. He didn't need to. The room listened carefully. Some out of respect, others out of regret. But all of them finally heard him. The meeting lasted just under an hour, but the shift in tone had been immediate. Marcus had outlined the new vision for the company with clarity and confidence, laying out how the merged teams would function, where investments were being redirected, and what kind of culture he expected moving forward. He didn't speak in buzzwords or vague promises. Everything was specific. There would be accountability, open collaboration across all roles, and no tolerance for gatekeeping masked as professionalism. He took questions after the presentation, answering each one without defensiveness, even when skepticism slipped through in the phrasing. He didn't try to convince anyone to stay. He made it clear that what came next would demand more than comfort zones and brand loyalty. It would demand adaptability, creativity, and respect for the work and for the people doing it. She sat 3 chairs down from where he stood, arms crossed at first, then slowly lowering them as the meeting progressed. Her face never quite settled. It flickered between forced neutrality and something more unsettled. Recognition. Not just of him, but of what he had become, and what that meant for the power she had once exercised without question. When the meeting ended, most of the team stood to leave, murmuring among themselves in low tones. Marcus remained in place, speaking quietly with the department lead who had asked a few sharp but fair questions. He could feel her watching him, the way people look at someone they underestimated, not because they've changed, but because you finally see them clearly. She lingered until the room cleared out, then walked toward him slowly. Her steps were more measured now, not the sharp, confident stride she had once used to command presence. When she stopped in front of him, there was a pause, as though she hadn't fully decided what version of herself to present. She looked at him for a second, then smiled, too small to be genuine, but too late to matter. "It seems like things have changed a lot," she said lightly, as if making small talk with a stranger. Marcus met her eyes without stepping back. "They have," he said, and they needed to. She gave a faint laugh, then looked down at the table where her notebook still sat. "Well, I guess you'll be reviewing everyone now, including me." He didn't respond to that directly. Instead, he took a small stack of onboarding packets from the table and handed one to the assistant who had re-entered the room. Then he turned back to her, calm but direct. "We're evaluating people on value now, not image. If your work holds up, you stay. If not, we help you find a better fit somewhere else." She nodded, her jaw tightening slightly. Fair enough. He didn't smile. He didn't try to soften the moment. "That's what we offer now. Fair." He left the room without looking back, heading down the hallway toward the workspace where his own team was settling into the new office. He passed familiar faces from the old agency, some offering cautious smiles, others avoiding eye contact. But he didn't walk like a man seeking approval. He walked like an owner who no longer needed anyone else's permission to belong. It was payroll day, and the energy in the office reflected it in small but noticeable ways. The mood was lighter, conversations at desks more relaxed, coffee orders a little more generous. The first pay period under the new ownership had come and gone without disruption, which had surprised some of the longtime employees who feared sweeping layoffs or dramatic reorganizations. Instead, things had been steady, structured, and more transparent than ever before. The systems Marcus and his team had implemented were efficient, and for the first time in a long while, many of the staff felt like they understood how decisions were being made and where they fit into the bigger picture. Still, there was tension beneath the surface for a few, especially those who had once benefited from an environment that rewarded familiarity over performance. In her office, she sat at her desk with her inbox open, clicking through new client memos and internal communications when the email arrived. The subject line was simple: payroll confirmation, direct deposit, and copies. She clicked it and opened the attached PDF out of habit, not expecting anything unusual. But the moment her eyes reached the bottom of the document, her hand paused on the mouse. There, just below the company seal, was a signature line. His name, clear, centered, official. Marcus Ellis, CEO. She stared at it longer than she needed to, reading it over as if the letters might rearrange into someone else's identity. But they didn't. It was his name, his signature, his paycheck, her payment. For all the years she had spent behind this desk, scanning candidate resumes, deciding who was a cultural fit, managing team dynamics with a tone that often pushed out the unfamiliar and welcomed only what felt safe, she had never imagined this. She had once looked at him and seen nothing worth investing in. Now her livelihood depended on his signature appearing every 2 weeks. As she closed the file and leaned back in her chair, there was a quiet knock at the door. One of the office assistants stepped in holding a small stack of physical envelopes. "We're still mailing copies to a few departments, but Mr. Ellis asked us to hand-deliver the first round to department leads, just to make sure everything processed correctly." She nodded slowly and accepted the envelope. The assistant hesitated just a second longer and added, "He said to confirm that everyone received theirs in full. Personally." The door clicked shut behind her, and for a moment, the office felt too still. She turned the envelope over in her hands, noting the weight of it, the unmistakable finality of her role reversal. She wasn't out of a job. She wasn't punished or demoted. No one had come to humiliate her. But the message had been delivered anyway, not through confrontation, not through a speech, but through ink on paper. He hadn't needed to remind her of what she said years ago. The silence of the check did it for him. She placed it on the desk and stared out the window for a long moment. The city moved beneath her, same skyline, same traffic, same view she had seen every morning. But now she saw it from a different seat, one she hadn't earned through power or tenure, but one she had to keep through merit. For the first time in years, she didn't feel untouchable. She felt seen, not by praise, by consequence. She waited until the end of the week to approach him. Not because she was unsure of what to say, but because she had rehearsed every version of the conversation too many times to count, and none of them sounded right. Every time she started forming the words in her head, something between an apology and an explanation, she was reminded that he owed her nothing, not even the opportunity to deliver it. Still, the weight of it lingered, and by Friday she had convinced herself that silence would say less about humility and more about avoidance. So she walked down the hallway, each step more measured than her usual stride, stopping just short of the glass door to his office. Through it, she could see him at his desk, reviewing a document, posture relaxed but focused. No assistants hovered, no theatrics or noise, just presence. She tapped gently, and he looked up, nodding once without surprise. "Come in," he said, not warmly, not coldly, just evenly. She stepped inside and let the door close behind her. For a brief moment, she stood silently, as if waiting to be invited to sit, but then took the chair across from him without instruction. He set the paper down and gave her his full attention. No smile, no expression to read into. He was simply listening. "I won't take much of your time," she began, her voice steady but lacking its usual practiced confidence. "I just felt it was important to say something." He said nothing, which made her realize how used she had become to being spoken over or reassured too quickly. She took a slow breath. "When you came in that day for the interview," she continued, "I judged you. Not on your qualifications, not on your portfolio. I made assumptions and I spoke in a way that I've regretted more times than I can count. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to acknowledge it. To you." Her eyes didn't waver, but her hands tightened slightly in her lap. He still hadn't moved. She went on. "You built something real, and now I work for it. For you. And that's the order it should have been in from the start." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was honest. He studied her for a moment, not with cruelty, but with care. Then he leaned forward just enough to speak clearly. "We don't hold people back for past mistakes," he said, "but we don't forget them either. This place is about what you do now, not what you were comfortable doing before." She nodded slowly, taking in the words. He continued. "You're here because you've been valuable. That's the metric. That's what we reward." There was no closure beyond that. No pat on the shoulder, no soft landing. She didn't expect one. She stood, thanked him quietly, and let herself out. As she walked back to her office, she felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter for finally having said it. Heavier for knowing that respect wasn't something she could ask for anymore. It had to be earned, and this time, not from a position of power, but from the one she had long overlooked, the one that quietly outlasted hers.